Greetings, friends. Operational situation at the front on the 9th of May. We will start with you, of course, of the Spinsk-Svitovsky section of the front. Active military operations are continuing in our area of Kisa-Kislavka and Kotlyarovka. So far they have a positional character. According to the information that is available, the enemy is transferring some forces to this area, that is, pulling up reserves. And, of course, preparing to try to strike in the direction of Ivanovka, with the aim of capturing, of course. That is, it is trying to align along the railway, and, accordingly, there is some activity of Yagodny. It has a positional and distracting character, but it is aimed precisely at preparing positions at Kislavka for further assault. We were asked to comment on a few more sites on Stelmakovka, and there is also information on Barastev, what is happening now. Because a lot of information is coming, especially from the Russian side, something is true, something is not. So the first one, from the starch attack to the birch bark. It's true, they are within the gray zone, they were supported by 2 armored vehicles. But footage was published from the high-altitude side, where they managed to knock out the equipment and accordingly retreated to their original positions, so we do not fix any changes. Although those statements that they are making attempts to advance south of Starch as a whole, they really correspond to the walls. But again the attacks were repelled. As for the Stelmakovka, the area that they stormed, it remains in the gray zone. It means that they and Kolomoisky regularly send additional forces, respectively, carry out rotations on the site. Here they work as assault troops in small groups, but in general, there are further attempts to gain a foothold on their part. So the situation so far has a positional character, but it is far from stabilization. Because just the same, the enemy is now aiming to pull forces apart on this segment of the front in order to naturally find a gap. And it may not be exactly in the direction of Stelmakovka, it may be anywhere. But all these attacks that we are currently observing at the site, they are aimed at finding this gap. This suggests that the transferred forces from the Valaisky district of the Belgorod region should strike somewhere on this sector of the front, without any changes so far. In the Limansky direction, no changes. Seversk direction. Here's a little more detail, because a large area has moved into the red zone. We will start with the summary on April 5th, more than a month ago. At that time, I published it together with visual data so that I could navigate where the attacks were. And 2 points respectively on the coordinate map where these attacks took place. We said at the time that the situation was being clarified. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of data on this site. Then on the 12th, I already gave only one of the points, and also added a gray zone. Well, in fact, where these points were marked, the enemy managed to gain a foothold in the end. Although this is generally what we have for about a month. It was possible to gain a foothold on a section up to 8 and 5 kilometers wide to a depth of 141 kilometers. The situation looks something like this. As you can see, there was minimal information received, after, let's say, until mid-April. Afterwards, minimally anything, just messages. But in fact, it looks like this approximately. Here it is necessary to add in the Seversky direction as a whole that there are active hostilities in the area of Belagorovka. So everything is within either the red or gray attack zone, without changes. There are also further attempts to strike from Zolotarevka in the direction of Verkhnekamenskoye. Footage was published from the APU with georeferencing approximately in this area, so we do not record any changes. That is, from positions near the road, they attacked in the direction of the fortification, but they could not advance. So they retreated to their original positions. Russian troops without changes are controversial. An attack was launched in the same way, but it was completely repelled. In general, we state that the activity remains quite high on the part of the enemy. For the most part, it is possible to repel these attacks, but just the same actions with a wide coverage. They allow the enemy to subsequently have such advances. The Seversk direction is also very very important for them, because it is also being discussed now. That they can strike in this direction, because it is not completely known where they will use the main forces, I mean the Russian command. Because there is a lot of different information, disinformation, it is clear that it's coming up. But Severskaya is also for them, because they cannot break through the Kremen forest. As you remember, the fighting has been going on here for a very long time, more than a year, without significant changes in fact. Although assaults occur daily. At the same time, the Yampilovka side failed to break through, yes. And naturally, the advance to Seversk, it then gives the opportunity to put pressure on the AFU positions from the flanks. Therefore, it is quite likely, taking into account the activity that there is, that they can hit Seversky as well. But this is such a moment. So far, we have only recorded changes in the imperial direction, without significant changes in the positional nature of the fighting. The enemy is making further attempts to advance in the western direction. Russian troops attacked from Bogdanovka in the direction of the Orlov Tract and in the direction of the farm. But in small assault groups, so we do not record any changes. There is also some activity on the eastern outskirts of Chazvoyer itself, but it also needs to be stated that the enemy is waiting for the very moment in order to use the forces that were transferred to Bakhmut. Because in fact, we have been stating with you for a month the information that was that they pulled significant forces into Bakhmut itself. Yes, concentrated them. And it seems as if they were already ready to send them to the Yara Watch. There was information from the fighters that they actually expect. But they continue to expect, because there will be a serious attack. But we do not record the activity that. Which means that these forces were pulled together. That is, so far everything is positional, most likely it is being prepared. But here it is, time will tell. Pokrovskoe direction. We continue to have negative changes in this sector of the front. Let's start with the northern flank, on which we have no changes. I will comment only on the moments that are happening now. We talked to you yesterday, focused on Novoalexandrovka, that we were trying to break through one of the forest belts to the settlement. I said then that everything is within the gray zone. Well, this is last night's broadcast. So yes, indeed, everything remained within the gray zone, but the enemy is now making attempts to advance in the north direction. That is, there are 3 forest belts that lead to Novoalexandrovka, where they stormed, now they are making attempts to the north. In the direction of the beams, conditionally so far, but perhaps this will just be an attempt to bypass. That is, to forge a wider coverage. But this is again, time will tell, because it's very early to tell. After all, we still have attacks and battles in the Arkhangelsk region are also continuing. Therefore, time will tell where the enemy will turn, because now a clear vector of attacks is not emerging, taking into account their numbers. They are pressing on Novoalexandrovka, they are pressing in the north direction, they are pressing in the east direction. That is, in the direction of fortification and Kalinav, they are pressing from Arkhangelsk in the west direction. They are pressing between the ceramics of Arkhangelsk north. In other words, the situation is similar, both on the Kupiansk-Svitovsky segment in principle, and in the Seversky direction. They are trying to find a gap due to wide coverage. Perhaps it would be more correct to say so. They are trying to find a gap further. Moving on. Umanskaya. Today, the footage was published by Russian military officers. The establishment of a red banner in a locality in the central part. The information is contradictory so far. I have previously added a gray-red zone. The section is wide, so far we will not say it, to a depth of up to 112 kilometers, we are talking from the extreme point. It looks like this in depth, for width, for fortifications we leave this for clarification, because there is conflicting information. Contradictory also due to the fact that, well, too fast as for me, because there is a statement that they installed it from a drone. But there again how difficult it would be to install. Plus, we had attacks on our minds. We have said that they are pushing from Orlovka, and they have made progress. We noted this progress recently for one of the fortifications, but I have to move so quickly. So far, this is how we leave the situation for clarification, with a remark, a very big remark on clarification. Because they can break through, maybe it was on another site. In general, I think a more detailed picture will be clarified tomorrow, but in any case, the enemy attacked in this direction. It's on the remark. One more point: we have firmed the position between Umansky and Notilova. The enemy managed to gain a foothold within the gray zone, which means to advance in a westerly direction. In the direction of Yasnobrodovka, in a section up to 3 and 2 kilometers wide to a depth of 1 and 3 kilometers. Active hostilities are continuing, well, just in the direction of Umansky, in the direction of Yasnobrodovka. Which means including in the northern direction? Well, further activity persists in the Notilov itself. Assault operations by Russian troops continue in the central part. Fierce battles are taking place. Again, the situation is similar as on the northern flank, where the enemy is attacked with a wide coverage. This is the whole difficulty of May Day. But similarly, we said only yesterday that they are pressing south of Pervomaysky to get to the beam of the house, and, unfortunately, they managed to advance to a depth of 650 meters, taking control of the territory of an abandoned field reservoir. There is just the same support, the enemy is hooked. The difficult situation remains, as you can see, very, very difficult. Although there is a relative stabilization in a number of areas, but the Pokrov direction is already becoming obvious, that if they say. Now they will also comment on Commander Zhorin's post. I will also give some comments at the end. If there are doubts about some areas, then the Pokrov direction is the area where they will strike the main blow. But they, in principle, cannot be said they will apply it. They are already causing it by the fact that they are using that amount of artillery, that is, the pressure of the barrel rocket artillery has increased. The number of aerial bombs, of course, they pull up much more personnel, well, they attack, change tactics, including not only here, involving armored vehicles with advanced RAP systems, but also they carry out attacks on motorcycles. In other words, they will use the whole complex. Therefore, in fact, they are already putting pressure on the Pokrovsky direction. Although many agree that this is just the same, well, conditionally Pokrovskaya, but the main goal is the city of Novogrodovka. That is, by the railway Karlovka, and what was announced by the Commander-in-Chief Siersky, the Kurakovsky direction, in principle. This is the ledge that we have formed. According to Seladov, it is not yet known. But these are the enemy's plans again, and the implementation, as you remember, is completely different. Because there is also the Kopensky direction, where they conducted the company twice, and it actually failed twice. Now the third company has started, yes, again they are pushing, taking into account the mistakes already. It seems like, as General Skibitsky said, that they act as a whole, but there is still a lot to this issue. There are mistakes that they made the first or second company, when they carried out an attack on Kupyan. Now they are putting pressure on Kupyansky again, but they are making some mistakes. Everything will show again, as they say, time. Therefore, the Pokrov direction remains very hot with us, but I will tell you that in other directions the same hour, and in the yoke. Although we speak for opposition, but the fighting there, although small assault groups, the fighting there is very serious, because the enemy also uses barrel rocket artillery, the same aerial bombs are used. And in other directions in the same way. We turn to the Kurakovsky direction Krasnogorovka. The heaviest fighting continues. Russian troops are still pressing, both from the northeast and from the south. There are active battles for the Krasnogorovsky refractory plant. The enemy receives information that they are pressing in the western direction. The western part remains under the control of the APU, and they actually storm it. So far, there is no visual confirmation of this information, but the fact that, in general, there were battles in the eastern and central parts, yes, they continue. But just the same, on this sector of the front, specifically in Krasnogorovka itself, the enemy very quickly draws conclusions. And, accordingly, tries to change tactics a little, respectively, when he conducts assault actions. That's why it's very dangerous here. Although from our side, very serious brigades are now fighting for Krasnogorovka, very serious therefore. Well, on the part of the enemy, there are also not weak forces, I will tell you, instructors are also involved. Who were involved both in the Avdiivsky and in the Kurakovsky direction. This is the one with the Wagner PMCs. That is, as much as possible with the experience that they have there. In fact, already yes, they have 10 years of experience. Therefore, this is a very serious experience of conducting active hostilities. I mean with Syria and a number of African states, that is, active hostilities. Therefore, the enemy has very serious forces. Moving on. So, we do not record any changes in Novomikhailovka in the direction of Poroskoviivka. There were attempts again on motorcycles, on 2 motorcycles, that is, as we said, assault pairs worked. There was an attempt before, as you remember, those who missed the broadcast, those who are new viewers. So there was an attempt to drive an armored car. It was knocked out by the AFU fighters at the T intersection. The Russian troops retreated to their original positions. The second time, we tried assault pairs on 2 motorcycles, what is new with us, but we also managed to repel this attack. For the most part, of course, drones, because the enemy himself, what does he report? He also reports that motorcycles give the opportunity, their speed of movement and so on, plus a change of trajectory. Maneuverability gives some advantages during artillery strikes. Plus again, this is not some kind of reservation going, where there are 10, 12, 15 people loaded there, yes. They can afford to on a motorcycle. 5 motorcycles were launched, the same 10 people, but only with a wide coverage. They act, of course, there will be artillery strikes on them, but the artillery itself in this case loses a little effectiveness. So drones remain effective, which is exactly what the opponent complains about. The fighting continues.